Hey, welcome back to Totally Rad Guitars. In this video, I'm going to talk about this Jet City JCA22 combo amp. I know I have a lot of requests for some of the other amps in my collection, and I promise I will get to them. But I just sold this amp on Reverb this morning, and so it's kind of now or never if I'm going to do a video on it. And to save you some time, my overall review is that this amp is great, and I would absolutely keep it or buy another one if it were ahead. The way I have my studio set up, I can really only fit heads. So most of the combo amps that I owned or have owned, I've either sold or I have listed for sale. And I just am looking for head versions of the same equipment mostly. So this amp, the special thing about it is it's a Chinese-made but officially licensed Soldano amp design. So Soldano, you know, the SLO100 is one of the most famous amps of all time probably. And it's kind of loosely based on a Marshall circuit, but a bit brighter, more cutting, more gain. And that amp design actually is kind of what inspired even the dual rectifier and PV5150 or 6505. And you know, who knows how many other amp designs are loosely based on that sort of logical evolution of the Marshall circuit. This amp, the circuit design is very, very similar to a real deal SLO100, but obviously some major differences, like it's not handmade in the USA, it doesn't have those massive transformers, and some other, you know, cost-cutting measures. But overall, it's a really, really good sounding amp. So obviously, you know, if you're shopping a $3,000 Soldano, then you're probably not going to like a $300 Jet City. You know, but if you're on a tighter budget and, you know, you're happy with that 90%, it's hard to go wrong with one of these. And I definitely will probably try to get another one, maybe a JCA50 or JCA100 head to add to my collection. But for now, this one's 22 watts, so it has, or 20 watts, it has two EL84s in the power section. So no, you know, big glass in this amp. And then 5 12AX7s. So one of those 12AX7s, V5, is the phase inverter. And real quick, as I normally do, we'll put the circuit diagram up. So there's two channels. There's a crunch channel and an overdrive channel. The crunch channel goes into V1A, that's our input gain stage. Then it skips V2 entirely, and then comes back in at V3, which is where the third gain stage in this case, because there's V1A, V1B, V3A, and then V3B is a tone stack driver. V4 is a tube-powered effects loop, so nothing to do with the gain structure on this amp, and V5 is the phase inverter. Now the real highlight of this amp, and the reason why the JCA22 is, in my opinion, a better amp than the JCA20, which is the single channel version, is that amp, the JCA20 is more like an Astroverb or something, where it's like just a crunch channel. This amp has the overdrive channel with almost the same sort of layout as the real SLO. So on this one, the overdrive channel is V1A, it skips V1B. That part of the tube is only used for the crunch channel. The V2 tube is exclusively used for this overdrive channel. There's a fourth gain stage for V3A. V3B is the tone stack driver, of course, it has a shared EQ. V4 is the tube-powered effects loop. V5 is the phase inverter, and out to the power section, in this case, EL84s, but on the JCA50, it's two 6L6s or two EL34s, and the 100 is four. So pretty standard layout. This is Brett from the editing room. While doing some research for this video, I found a few things that might interest some of you. I'm not an expert by any means on amp circuit design. I'm just an enthusiast with enough knowledge to tinker and give a general explanation, but there are a lot of concepts above my head. Check out this article at ampbooks.com, which I'll link in the description, for a lot of detail on the intricacies of the SLO circuit design. There's also a YouTube video that dives into cold clipping gain stages with a dual rectifier, very similar to this circuit, on another YouTube channel called Lancertronics, which I'll link to here. That video is by a professor at Georgia Tech, so if you really want to learn more about this sort of thing, I'd encourage you to seek out some resources like that, or amp builder forums like Amp Garage, EL34 World, or Music Electronics Forum, where you can find a ton of great information. This particular amp I have modified, and I have this this piece of masking tape with my modifications written on it. But there are 5 mini toggle switches that I drilled into the front panel. I did this a really, really long time ago. And basically I modified C1, which is the input capacitor, to raise the value or lower it. R9, which I called structure, but that's kind of a voicing change. C5, which is a bright cap. C6, which is another bright cap, which kind of affects the voice. And R26, which is the slope resistor and the EQ. And out of all these mods, if I were going to go in and do just one of them again, R26 is the one that has the really most noticeable effect on the sound. And most of the reason I did these mods, if you look around the web, there's tons of guides for modding these amps. They're very moddable. They have a really easy to understand circuit. When you open this amp, it's just one circuit board. So it's a great, if you want to sort of try your hand at, swapping a couple of values out or experimenting with different tones, this is probably a really good amp to do it on. And that said, of course, make sure you're being really safe. Even on the 22 watt version like this, those filter capacitors have enough voltage to kill you. So make sure you're grounding it, make sure you've got, you take all the right steps to protect yourself so that you don't get hurt doing, stupid stuff like this. So R26, the slope resistor, affects the EQ, which is on both channels. Some of these other values only affect the overdrive channel, and really the changes are so subtle. But basically my goal was to just match it to the SLO circuit. So with all the switches in the up position, the down position right now, all those values match the SLO 100 circuit according to diagrams on the internet. In the up position, it's either the stock value or it's another value that I picked that's a little bit further in the other direction than the stock value. For example, the slope resistor, like I talked about. I believe the stock value was like 47K or something like that. On the switch right now, I just have a two-way switch. With it down, it's 32K, which is kind of like a Marshall. It's tighter, it's more aggressive. The palm mutes sound amazing, but there's less bass. So you have to make up for that maybe in post-processing or something like that. And then in the up position, it's 59K, which is further the other direction. It's a little woodier, bassier, maybe flubbier if but it does a little bit more of like a sludgy tone, which I really like. So I'll demo those two tones so you can hear, but the stock value is sort of in between those two. And this, gave it some extra versatility to me because with those two switches and then boost pedals and that sort of thing, you can really tailor the tone to sound however you like. And pretty much all the other switches I'm going to leave in the factory positions for right now. So starting out, we're on the crunch channel. This really does not have a clean channel. I'm playing a 1990 Ibanez 540R LTD, which has an F1 pickup in the bridge and the neck. This is a really, really nice guitar. And we're just using the stock speaker that comes with this cabinet, which is it's an Eminence made speaker that supposedly is very, very similar to the Eminence Legend. I don't know how accurate that is because I've never owned an Eminence Legend, but it's a pretty good sounding speaker. And since I'm sitting right in front of it this time instead of it being down on the floor, I am going to put my earplugs in when we get to the high gain section just so that I don't blast myself. But on the crunch channel, I have it set up pretty reasonably. So here on the bridge pickup, you can hear with the gain right around 2. And I've got the volume just a hair over 1, which is about as clean as it's going to sound. As you can hear, it's not, it is not clean at all. So you pretty much are between even at the lowest possible setting, you're going to be pretty crunchy. And it's very bright. This is a very bright amp, just like an SLO. I mean, that's kind of expected, but it's really, really bright sitting next to it, brighter than some of my Marshalls. And especially on this channel, because the way that this circuit is designed, the further turned up the gain, and this is the same with like plexis and stuff, the further you turn up the gain, the less the bright cap has effect. So if I clip that bright cap out, it would be way darker. And if I turn the gain, from 2 all the way to the top on this amp, the maximum is 9. It's definitely going to thicken up, and it won't be nearly as bright. But it kind of takes away from the cut. So, it's a nice balance the way it is now, but it is kind of overly bright, I would say, at 2. A little too bright for my taste. I'll set that up around 5 now. You can just hear how much more gain that adds. Which is kind of it's pretty mean sounding. It's very aggressive, it's very cutting, still pretty bright at this setting, and I'm just going to take it all the way up to 9. You can hear the maximum amount of gain that you can get out of the crunch channel. Which is pretty gainy, but you can hear that bass sort of getting introduced a little bit more there. But it's still very, very bright. So, all right, so on to the highlight of this amp, so to speak. We'll jump straight into the overdrive channel. And the way I have it set up right now, I have the overdrive set to 6, bass is at 6, middle's at 4, and treble's at 5. And I have the presence right about 5 as well. And the volume sort of to taste, and I have the slope resistor in the down position, which is sort of the more aggressive Marshall-y kind of sound. And what I'll do just to start it off is I will flip the slope resistor just so you can hear the difference between the 32K setting and the 59K setting, which should be a little bit thicker. So yeah, it's definitely retains the brightness, and really the character of the mids and sort of low mids area is what gets changed the most by that slope resistor. I flipped it back down to 32K because that's my preferred setting here. And I'm just gonna show something I think is really cool about this amp. I'm gonna set the bass and mids both to 6, and I'm gonna roll the treble way down to like 2, and set the presence higher. I'm going to set the presence at 7. And so you're basically, I've got the mids and bass up high, the treble is cut, but then the presence brings back in some of the brightness, and I think this is kind of a cool sound. So it starts to feel a little bit more classic that way. And now if I do the opposite, if I roll the presence down to 2 and I roll the treble back up, I'll set it to 6. I don't want to tear my head off. It's still kind of the same ballpark of tone, but a different texture, and I think that's kind of a cool way to run it. And if I roll them both down, you can sort of tame some of the, I'll take the middle down to 5 as well. So right now, treble and presence are both at 2, middle is at 5, and bass is at 6. You can kind of tame the highs, but it's still a really bright amp. So the bass is a little flubbier like that. It doesn't quite have that sort of cutting punch, but in the room, and granted I'm sitting 2 feet from the speaker, that sounds better to me. but it's also a little bit less in your face about it. And I am gonna stick one of these in here now, just so it doesn't kill me. If I roll the gain down a little bit, I'm gonna set the overdrive gain to like 3, and I'm gonna roll that treble back up. I'm gonna set the treble at 5 and the presence at 4, sort of a good like middle ground setting so you can hear. Now that the gain has been rolled off, it's going to be even brighter for the same reason that I described before. So it still sounds pretty good. It's still pretty distorted. And if I take it, way to the extreme, I'll set the overdrive all the way up to 9, which is as high as it goes. It kind of gets a little bit flubby down in that low end, and that doesn't surprise me at all to hear that the dual rectifier or triple rectifier Mesa amps are sort of loosely based on the same circuit, because they do the exact same thing. And there is a certain type of tone where you kind of want that. And I play a lot of cover stuff. I don't play out or anything. I mostly just play at home. So I play along to a lot of records, and I try to get my sound to be as close as possible to be authentic or whatever. And there's some songs, especially like some 90s like punk rock or new metal stuff where you turn the gain all the way up on a dual rectifier and don't boost it, and just that's the tone, and it sounds like it sounds on the record. But obviously if you want it to be more articulate, then rolling the gain back a little bit, keeping some of that brightness from the bright cap, and then adding like a tube screamer or something like that instead is definitely an option here. And I am going to show that a little bit. I'm going to set the gain right around 6. I'm going to scoop the mids out just a little to 4, trebles at 5, bass is still at 6, presence at 4. And I think that's all pretty reasonable. And I'm just going to kick on this tube screamer. And now you can hear what it sounds like boosted, with the gain kind of like in a good, reasonable middle area. So yeah, it definitely sounds really, really good boosted. And the EQ on this amp is more interactive than a lot of other amps that I have. And I think that's part of what has given these amps such great staying power. There was a time when these things were just flying off the shelves all the time. They were, inexpensive, they sounded good, they had a lot of options, and they appealed to a lot of players. And now, since I sold this one, I just sort of looked around to see if I could find another one, like a head maybe to replace it. And I'm actually having trouble finding one. And it's not like they're not out there. They sold tons of these things, but I think they've kind of trickled into hands where people want to keep them, and they're not as available as they once were. And that's no small part to such a great design and a really customizable and moddable design. A lot of people have these modded. And I'll do one last demonstration, going for like a more classic kind of tone. I've got the treble rolled down again to 3, the presence at 2, The mid's at 5, and I'll roll the bass down to 4 a little bit. That's sort of like a kind of middle ground, and I'll do something. All right, there you have it. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. Have a good one.